The question was, how did the arts live and breathe in your childhood?
Pretty much through my mother. I was able to be exposed to many different types of art. My mother, she was very creative. She used to make the goofiest looking beaded flowers made out of wire. It was so 70s. It would be bright orange and clear brown, and I mean just hideous. But she would, bead wires and bend them into shape, and she would make petals out of them and then wrap it in this like tacky green paper so that looked like a stem. Anyway, so those were all over the house, and she crocheted and she made me clothes. Okay. So she was, I think for her it was something to do, but also back then it was a necessity. If I needed a dress and she couldn't afford to go get me one, she would make it.
How was the artist in you born?
The artist in me, I don't know. I mean, I think just in school, you take art class. That's just part of the curriculum. It was something I enjoyed doing. Obviously, after sitting there doing, multiplication tables or whatever, art was a nice change from the day. The first type of art I really got into was calligraphy, as corny and ridiculous as it is. That was what I loved doing. I had a whole set where you would stick the ink into the nib of the pen, and you would do that. And I think from there I really got into drawing. And so illustration became probably my favorite form of art.
Who are or have been your creative mentors?
I would have to say every art teacher I've ever had. They're probably the most nurturing type of teachers that are out there. Because the basis of art is, it's a form of expression, so they always just want you to express, yada, 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 and anything you do is beautiful, there's no wrong, there's no right. So any art teacher I had, my first art teacher in high school, Mrs. Eric, she was just this crazy, crazy lady. You could picture her as sort of like the crazy cat lady that lives next door. She was that kind of woman, but she was very nurturing. And just like I said, just nothing you could do was wrong. I mean, I could just paint something that was just hideous, and she would, it's gorgeous, it's lovely, obviously that's what you were feeling. So she was very nurturing. And all along the way, I've been very lucky. I've had a lot of great teachers. Any class that I've had, I would, find a mentor with that person. They would guide me.
Do you have a spiritual practice that informs your art and your life?
No. I do not.
Then how do you nurture your creativity in your daily life?
I am, as you can tell from my answer to the last question, I'm just a very methodical person. And so my form of art at the moment is knitting. And so I just make sure that I do it every day. I wake up very early to do it for a couple of hours, or I'll come straight home and do it. Sometimes I'll sneak it in at work. But that's I guess how I nurture it. I do feel like the more exposure you have to your whatever medium it is that you're expressing through is something that you need to really bond with, and it takes a lot of time. A book that I read that really influenced me was Gladwell's Outliers, and he talks about that 10,000 hour rule. To get good at something and to be your best at something, you need to put in 10,000 hours, which is approximately 10 years of your life.
Okay.
Although I think I got my 10,000 hours in for knitting over the past 5 years. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm like a blunt tool. I just, if I want to get good at something, if I want to learn something, I just do it all the time.
Okay. And you were saying before that you started knitting when?
I started knitting in 2006.
Okay.
And it was after I ran the marathon. So I wanted something that was like completely different. Something that was sedentary, something that require me to move that much, which knitting and painting can be very physical. There are a lot of art forms that can be very, very physical. And so knitting was something that seemed sedentary enough for me at that time.
What do you do when you're not particularly feeling inspired?
That is actually the best thing about knitting, is because you can just knit. without any inspiration. You can just cast on some stitches and just start knitting if you want to keep your hands busy, which I like to do. As opposed to like a painter. I mean, I guess you could just start painting, but without a sketch or without an idea, I think that's very hard. You know, so a lot of times sometimes you need to give yourself a break. You need to do that, step away and don't even look at it or think about it for a couple of hours or whatever, however long. But I tend to do the opposite. You know, if I'm not inspired or if I don't feel like knitting, that's when I will force myself to do something. And sometimes the best ideas come out of that. But what a lot of knitters do, or at least the process always begins with something called a swatch. And that's when you take a stitch pattern that you like, you know, a cable or something that's bumpy, and you just take a yarn and you just try it out, see how it looks in different weights of yarn, different colors, things like that. And so I'll do that sort of obsessively. If I can't think of an actual full design, I'll just swatch and swatch and swatch and just see if something comes out of it, or at least
Inspires you artistically.
I think inspiration comes from many, many different places. It can be as simple as something I saw on someone, a garment that I like, that I want to imitate. It can be, you know, with knitting, there's so many different sides to it, because you're involved with so much of the process, because you're making the fabric as you're creating the garment. Unlike, you know, cut and sew, where you just buy the fabric, you cut it, and then you sew it together. You're kind of sculpting it as you go along. So there could be a certain element of something that I like that could spark off an idea for a garment or an accessory or whatever. It could be a color that I think would just look great as a hat or something. But probably, you know, with knitting, so much of your inspiration comes from the yarn. You know, you find yarn that you like, maybe it's a color that you were drawn to, and once you start working with it, it sort of turns into something that you think, oh, this would look really great as a pair of mittens. This would look really great as a cardigan jacket or something. So I feel my inspiration is fairly straightforward. You know, I'm not like birds in the sky, you know.